There's a shift that happens the moment you stop living on autopilot and start taking control of your mind. Not your environment, not your schedule, not your circumstances, your mind. That shift changes everything. Because mindset is the root. Mindset is the filter. Mindset is the place where every thought, every decision, every action originates. And until you transform that, nothing else sticks. You can change your habits, but if your mindset doesn't change, you'll sabotage the habit. You can change your goals, but if your mindset stays the same, you'll aim low or talk big and act small. You can change your surroundings, your job, your relationships, your finances, but until your internal operating system shifts, you'll keep repeating the same patterns with new people, new projects, new environments. Mindset is the invisible boundary between where you are and where you could be. It's the lens through which you see everything, including yourself. It determines how you interpret failure, how you handle discomfort, how you respond to stress, how you define success. It's not just how you think, it's how you live. And most people never realize how powerful their mindset is until they hit a wall. That wall might be external, a setback, a loss, a rejection, or it might be internal, a sense of frustration, an emptiness that doesn't go away, a pattern of always falling short of your own potential. Either way, that wall exists to wake you up. It exists to ask one question: are you ready to take responsibility for what's going on in your mind? Because the mind is not fixed. It is not static. It is not permanent. Your mindset is not a personality trait. It is not something you were born with. It is a set of patterns that you can disrupt, a set of beliefs that you can challenge, a way of thinking that you can upgrade, rebuild, and rewire. The people who transform their lives start by transforming the way they think. They stop reacting. They stop defaulting. They stop telling themselves the same old stories, and they start writing new ones. Not overnight, not with one breakthrough, but with a decision, followed by discipline. And that decision changes everything. Most people wait for change to happen on the outside before they believe it can happen on the inside. They think, if I had more time, I'd be more disciplined. If I had more support, I'd be more consistent. If things calm down, I'd finally get focused. But that's backward. Because when you transform your mindset, you stop waiting for the world to change. You change your world from the inside out. A transformed mindset isn't just about thinking positively. It's about thinking powerfully. It's about building mental resilience, emotional control, strategic clarity. It's about not letting fear dictate your choices. It's about not letting stress become your identity. It's about knowing who you are and training your mind to work for you, not against you. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you decide that from this moment forward, you are no longer going to think like the person who's been holding you back. You are going to think like the person you're becoming. You're going to challenge every excuse, every limitation, every old narrative that kept you playing small. This is not about becoming someone else. This is about becoming who you were before the world told you to shrink, before fear became your compass, before doubt became your language. It's about returning to your power, not through hype, but through clarity, not through intensity, but through consistency. And it starts now, not when your schedule clears, not when your life feels easier. Now, because your mindset is not something you can afford to ignore, it's either your greatest weapon or your greatest weakness. And only you get to decide which one it's going to be. The transformation of your mindset begins with awareness, not theory, not motivational quotes, not a burst of hype, awareness. Because you cannot change what you do not notice. You cannot interrupt a pattern you have never observed. You cannot upgrade your thinking while living in denial about how you're thinking right now. Most people are not conscious of their mental patterns. They are running the same scripts over and over. Automatic loops of thought that shape their emotions, influence their behaviors, and ultimately define their results. But they don't realize it because it's familiar, because it feels normal, because it's all they've ever known. So the first step is to slow down and observe. Observe the way you talk to yourself in difficult moments. Observe the questions you ask when things go wrong. Observe the stories you repeat when you feel stuck. Most of the time, it's not the external event that's stopping you. It's your interpretation of it, the meaning you assign to it, the way you process it through your mindset. You don't need to analyze every thought you've ever had, but you do need to develop a habit of catching the patterns that don't serve you. Because if you don't catch them, you'll repeat them. If you don't disrupt them, they'll run your life, and not in the direction you want. It starts with becoming a witness to your mind. When you wake up, what's the first thing your brain focuses on? When you feel overwhelmed, what thoughts show up first? When you fail, what do you tell yourself? Do you hear, "This always happens to me"? Or do you hear, "This is temporary, and I'll find a way forward"? One of those is a fixed mindset. The other is growth. And this isn't about judgment. It's about accuracy. The goal is not to shame yourself for having negative thoughts. The goal is to notice them early, because the sooner you notice them, the sooner you can shift them. And every time you shift a thought, you create a crack in the old mindset. You weaken its grip. You loosen the chain. The second step is to challenge your assumptions. Your beliefs shape your mindset. And your beliefs are not facts. They are conclusions you've drawn, often from limited data, often from moments that happened years ago that your mind interpreted through fear, pain, or confusion. And those interpretations became laws you now live by. You believe you're not disciplined because you've failed in the past. But was it really a failure of discipline? Or was it a lack of structure, a lack of clarity, a lack of emotional regulation? You believe you're not a leader because you don't like speaking up in groups. But is that really true? Or are you just holding on to a memory of being judged or misunderstood? Transformation requires that you stop protecting your old beliefs, that you stop defending your limitations, that you start questioning the lens through which you've been viewing your life. Who told me this was true? When did I decide this? What if that belief is outdated? These questions don't just create insight, they create movement. Because once a belief is questioned, it loses its certainty. And once certainty cracks, possibility enters. Possibility is where the new mindset begins. Not a mindset based on fear, not a mindset based on protection, a mindset based on power, a mindset based on ownership, a mindset built on the belief that nothing inside you is fixed unless you decide to keep it that way. And ownership is the third piece. Because even with awareness and even with insight, nothing shifts until you take responsibility for your mind. You cannot outsource it. You cannot delegate it. You cannot blame other people for the way you think. It's yours, and that means it's yours to transform. Ownership is not about guilt. It's about power. When you own your mindset, you stop waiting for people to change. You stop waiting for life to get easier. You stop hoping that your circumstances will magically align. You realize, I control the frame. I control the narrative. I control what I choose to focus on, believe in, and act on. And from that place of ownership, you begin to move differently. You start managing your focus like it's sacred. You stop feeding distractions. You stop reinforcing your old identity. You take back the energy you've been wasting on worry, comparison, overthinking, and you redirect it into clarity, commitment, and execution. But that redirection is not automatic. It must be trained. Which brings us to the fourth piece, mental conditioning. If you want a new mindset, you must condition it daily, just like you would train a muscle, just like you would practice a skill, just like you would rehearse for a performance. You do not build a powerful mind by accident. You build it by design. Mental conditioning is about intentional repetition. It's about deciding what kind of mindset you want and then feeding it, training it, reinforcing it every day. That means choosing your input. It means curating your environment. It means practicing gratitude, not as a concept, but as a discipline. It means studying your triggers, learning how to respond instead of react, and creating systems that help you stay in alignment when things get chaotic. You don't wait for confidence, you condition it. You don't wait for clarity, you create it. You don't wait for resilience, you build it. One challenge at a time, one decision at a time, one repetition at a time. And this is where most people fall off. They start strong, they feel inspired, they raise their standards, but they forget the discipline. They forget the structure. They forget that transformation isn't a moment. It's a process. When it's a process that demands consistency, not perfection. So you create a mindset ritual, not something complicated, not something overwhelming, but something you do every day to condition your mind. It could be 5 minutes of visualization, 5 minutes of writing down your standards, 5 minutes of revisiting the person you're becoming and reminding yourself of why it matters. That 5 minutes may not seem like much, but over time, it builds the muscle. It shifts the baseline. It recenters you in the identity you are choosing, not the one you inherited, not the one that was shaped by fear, but the one that is forged in clarity, commitment, and purpose. Once you've started to condition your mind, there's a shift that takes place, but it's not loud. It doesn't always feel dramatic. It often shows up in small moments, in the space between stimulus and response, in the way you choose to speak, in the way you show up when no one's watching. It's subtle, but it's powerful. And that shift is identity alignment. Because mindset is not just what you think. It's who you believe you are. And the gap between who you've been and who you are becoming is where the internal conflict lives. If you don't close that gap, you'll always feel like an imposter in your own life. You'll set goals, but your self-concept will fight them. You'll try to break patterns, but your sense of identity will quietly pull you back to what's familiar. The question is not, can I achieve more? The question is, do I believe I'm the kind of person who does? Because if your mind says yes, but your identity says no, your behavior will always betray your beliefs. Not consciously, not deliberately, but subtly, in procrastination, in hesitation, in resistance. And that's where people get stuck. They upgrade their goals without upgrading their self-image. They start behaving like the next version of themselves, but deep down, they haven't made peace with that version yet. They haven't fully accepted it. They haven't owned it. So they slip, and when they slip, they make it mean something. They say, see, this isn't who I really am. And they return to old ways, not because they're lazy, but because their identity hasn't caught up. If you want to transform your mindset for good, you must bring your identity with you. You must become the person who no longer negotiates with your old self. You must shift the way you describe yourself, not just out loud, but silently, internally, consistently. Instead of saying, I'm trying to be more disciplined, you say, I am a disciplined person. Maybe instead of, I want to be more focused, you say, I operate with clarity. You know, it's not, I need to be better, it's, I lead myself powerfully. And then you act accordingly. Not because you're faking it, but because you're claiming it. You are declaring to your nervous system, this is who we are now. And that declaration must be backed by repetition. Repetition of behavior, repetition of thought, repetition of self-talk that reflects your new standard. The world will still treat you like the old version of yourself until you stop showing up that way, until your identity is so consistent that it becomes undeniable, until you no longer flinch under pressure, until your habits speak so loudly that people stop questioning your trajectory. But before the world believes it, you must. You must trust the new identity you're creating, even before it's fully solidified, even when the evidence is limited, even when the results are slow. You must become the architect of your identity, and that requires imagination. Most people use imagination for fear. They use it to catastrophize, to predict the worst, to mentally rehearse failure. But imagination is neutral. It becomes powerful or destructive, depending on how you direct it. If you want to transform your mindset, you must learn to use your imagination to create your future. You must visualize who you're becoming, not once, daily, consistently, with clarity. You must rehearse confidence, rehearse resilience, rehearse strength, because the brain doesn't distinguish between what is vividly imagined and what is real. It only knows what you feed it. So you feed it proof. You give it experiences. You create small wins that reinforce the new story. You start acting in alignment with your new identity, even in small ways, especially in small ways. Because identity isn't formed in big dramatic moments. It's formed in daily decisions. You decide to wake up on time, not because it's easy, but because that's what the next version of you does. You decide to keep your word to yourself, not because anyone's watching, but because your integrity is not up for debate anymore. You decide to finish what you start, not because you feel motivated, but because that's who you are now. And every time you do that, you build the identity, brick by brick, pattern by pattern. You reinforce the mindset you're cultivating, and eventually it becomes real, not because of luck, not because of a breakthrough, but because you were willing to act in alignment with it long enough for the transformation to lock in. And during that process, you will face resistance, not just internally, but externally. People around you may not understand the change. They may question your commitment. They may try to pull you back into old habits, old stories, old roles that no longer fit who you're becoming. And that's okay, because mindset transformation is not always accepted. It's often rejected. Not because people are trying to hurt you, but because your growth challenges their comfort. Your change makes them question their own stasis. And some people won't like that. You must be willing to disappoint others before you disappoint yourself. You must be willing to protect your new identity, even when it's fragile, even when it's still taking shape. You must be willing to say no to what no longer serves you. Not with anger, but with certainty. Not with apology, but with clarity. Because the more you live in alignment with your new mindset, the stronger it becomes. And eventually, the people around you will adapt, or they will leave. But either way, your life will begin to reflect the person you become. And in that reflection, you'll see something powerful. The mindset you used to dream about is now your default. The mental patterns you used to fight against are now the foundation you stand on. The identity you used to visualize is now the person you wake up as every single day. As your new mindset takes shape and your identity aligns with it, you'll start to notice a shift in how you experience challenges. Not because the challenges get smaller, but because you stop seeing them as threats. You begin to recognize that every challenge is an opportunity to reinforce who you are, to prove to yourself that your transformation is not a concept, it's a reality. Most people run from challenge. They see it as a sign they're failing. They interpret discomfort as a red flag. But the truth is, discomfort is data. Resistance is feedback. Pressure is growth in disguise. And when you've truly transformed your mindset, you welcome it. You stop fearing stress and start using it. You stop shrinking under weight and start rising into it. This isn't about ignoring pain or pretending struggle doesn't exist. It's about refusing to let struggle define your ceiling. When you adopt a mindset rooted in growth and responsibility, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this here to teach me?" That question alone reclaims your power. Your mind was not built to avoid difficulty. It was built to adapt. And when you stop resisting difficulty, you unlock the brain's most powerful trait, neuroplasticity, the ability to change, the ability to evolve, the ability to grow stronger through exposure to challenge. And here's what happens. Your threshold increases. What used to trigger you doesn't. What used to shake you doesn't. What used to derail you becomes manageable. Not because the problems disappeared, but because you've built the internal structure to handle them. That structure is built on habits, mental habits, emotional habits, behavioral habits. And if you want to keep growing, you must protect and refine those habits with intention. You must look at your mental fitness the same way you look at physical fitness. It requires reps. It requires form. It requires resistance. You don't develop strength by avoiding the gym. And you don't develop mental resilience by avoiding life. You train it. You show up when you're tired. You stay focused when you're distracted. You keep going when quitting is easier. And every time you do, your baseline shifts. And that shift, that internal change, it creates an outer ripple. Because when your mind is strong, your decisions improve. When your decisions improve, your behavior becomes more aligned. When your behavior becomes more aligned, your life starts to reflect that inner standard. But alignment isn't just about action. It's about congruence. It's about becoming someone who doesn't have to perform their mindset because they live it. They embody it. It's real. It's present in how they think, how they move, how they treat others, how they lead themselves. And the deeper that congruence becomes, the less energy you spend battling yourself. No more mental tug of war between what you know you should do and what you feel like doing. No more internal negotiations. Just clarity, just flow, just forward movement. That flow doesn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency. And consistency doesn't come from motivation. It comes from values. When your values are clear, your discipline becomes automatic. Because you're no longer acting from emotion. You're acting from identity. And that identity shows up in the smallest choices. The way you handle your mornings, the way you respond to unexpected obstacles, the way you speak about yourself when no one's listening. The mindset is not built in grand gestures. It's built in daily alignment. But even with alignment, you will still face setbacks. You will still experience moments of doubt, moments of failure, moments when you question everything. And that's normal because transformation is not a straight line. It is a cycle, a rhythm, a pattern of rising, falling, recalibrating, and rising again. What matters is not whether you stumble, it's how quickly you recover. And that recovery time, it shortens the stronger your mindset becomes. Because now, you're not devastated by mistakes. You're informed by them. You're not destroyed by failure. You're trained by it. You see each fall not as the end, but as another rep, another layer of resilience, another opportunity to deepen your identity. But none of that works without reflection, without space, without intentional time to step back, observe the pattern, adjust the approach, and refine the standard. Transformation without reflection becomes motion without direction. So you build in the space. You create time to think. You don't just consume, you contemplate. You don't just execute, you elevate. You ask yourself, where am I slipping into comfort? Where am I avoiding growth? Where have I started to settle again? And then you adjust. Because settling isn't something that happens all at once. It's a slow drift, a quiet resignation, a small compromise repeated until it becomes the norm. And the only way to stop the drift is to become hyper-aware of your trajectory, hyper-intentional about your direction. And that's what transformation really is. Not a lightning bolt, not a dramatic moment, but a million small pivots, a daily realignment, a commitment to never returning to the version of you that was driven by fear, ruled by excuses, and guided by old beliefs. As you continue evolving your mindset, a subtle but powerful question starts to take root. And that question is, what else am I capable of? Not asked from ego, not from comparison, but from curiosity, from possibility, from an internal spark that begins to grow when you realize you've been living with only a fraction of your true potential. Because once your identity aligns and your behavior starts reflecting that identity consistently, you no longer chase confidence. It shows up, not because you've arrived at perfection, but because you've earned your own trust. You know you'll do what you said you'd do. You know you'll keep showing up. You know you can handle whatever comes. That self-trust becomes the engine of performance, and it fuels everything, your relationships, your decisions, your ability to stay calm under pressure. It allows you to play a bigger game because you're no longer doubting your foundation. You've built it. You've tested it. You've reinforced it. Now it's time to rise on top of it. This is where you begin to shift from internal transformation to external influence. Because when your mindset reaches this level, it no longer serves just you. It starts to impact the people around you. Not because you try to convince them, but because you model what's possible. You embody the standard. People will notice. They may not say it. They may not compliment you, but they'll watch. They'll feel it. They'll start to adjust their own behavior just by being in your presence, because your clarity creates clarity for others. Your calm creates calm. Your commitment gives them permission to raise their own standards. This is how leadership is born. Not through title, not through authority, but through alignment, through authenticity, through living a life that is congruent with your highest principles. And that kind of leadership doesn't need to speak loudly. It speaks through consistency, through integrity, through being the example. And that influence isn't always comfortable, because the moment you shift, the mirror you hold up gets clearer. And not everyone wants to see themselves in that mirror. Some will feel challenged. Some will feel threatened. Some will try to pull you back. Not because they hate you, but because they're uncomfortable with their own potential. This is where boundaries become essential. Because as you rise, not everyone will rise with you. Some people will celebrate your growth. Others will resist it. But your job is not to shrink to stay palatable. Your job is to stand firm in who you're becoming, even when it makes others uncomfortable. That's not selfishness. That's self-respect. Because if you start compromising your values to make others feel safe, you begin eroding your own transformation. You begin putting cracks in the foundation you worked so hard to build. And before you know it, you're living at someone else's level again. So you protect your energy, not with defensiveness, but with discernment. You choose your conversations carefully. You invest your time intentionally. You know that every hour you give away is an hour you'll never get back. And you refuse to spend it around energy that drains you or beliefs that pull you backward. This doesn't mean you isolate. It means you elevate. You seek out people who push you, who challenge you, who refuse to let you coast, who don't care about your comfort zone because they care more about your growth. And when you find those people, you pour into them, you build with them, you grow together. Because transformation is powerful, but it's even more powerful when it's multiplied, when your environment reflects your mindset, when your community matches your energy, when your conversations are not about problems, but about progress, not about gossip, but about greatness. This is where momentum lives, in aligned environments, in powerful relationships, in shared standards. And once you lock that in, growth becomes inevitable. You stop questioning whether you'll stay on track. You're surrounded by people who hold the line with you. You don't just have accountability, you have culture. And culture beats motivation every time. Because motivation is personal, but culture is collective. When the people around you live at a high standard, that standard becomes your baseline. You don't need hype. You don't need reminders. You just show up. Because showing up is what everyone around you does. This is why proximity matters. Because transformation is easier when you're not doing it alone. It's easier when you don't have to explain yourself, when your ambition isn't questioned, when your discipline isn't mocked, when your focus isn't misunderstood. So if you're serious about evolving your mindset, look at your circle. Look at your inputs. Look at the voices you're letting into your head every day. Are they reinforcing your old self, or are they stretching you toward your future? And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. That's a signal, a prompt to make changes, not out of judgment, but out of alignment, out of self-respect, out of clarity about what you need to sustain the transformation you've already started. Because sustaining transformation is not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about designing your life to support your mindset. It's about building in systems, rhythms, environments, and relationships that make growth the default. There comes a point in the transformation of your mindset where everything changes. Not because your circumstances shift, but because your perception does. You stop asking whether you're going to succeed, You stop wondering whether it's possible. You stop seeking reassurance from the outside. And you start living from conviction, from alignment, from a place inside you that no longer wavers. This is the point where you no longer just think differently. You exist differently. You move with clarity. You speak with purpose. You take action without hesitation. Not because you never doubt, but because you've trained your mind to navigate doubt with power. You've trained it to lead, not react, to respond, not spiral, to challenge, not comply. You no longer play the victim in your own story. You've stepped fully into the role of creator, the one who writes the narrative, the one who controls the tone, the pace, the plot. This is a powerful shift, not because it makes life easier, but because it makes you stronger. Life will still throw you tests. It will still challenge your mindset. But now you welcome it, because every challenge is a chance to practice. Every setback is a chance to apply what you've built. Every moment of resistance is an invitation to step deeper into alignment. You begin to realize that obstacles don't slow you down. They refine you. They shape you. They call out new levels of resourcefulness, creativity, and commitment that you didn't know you had. You become someone who doesn't just tolerate pressure, you perform under it because you've done the work. You've built the mind. And when your mind is built, the world no longer gets to dictate your pace. People's opinions no longer hijack your focus. Uncertainty no longer paralyzes you because you've already decided who you are. You've already chosen your standard, and nothing outside of you is stronger than what's been built inside of you. That's what it means to be mentally free, to walk through the world with agency, with intention, with power. You're no longer distracted by everything that used to consume you. You've simplified your focus. You've quieted the noise. You've stripped away the mental clutter. And in that clarity, there is peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you can face whatever comes your way. The kind of peace that comes from trusting yourself, not blindly, but because you've earned it. This version of you doesn't hustle for identity. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to chase validation. You don't need to win approval. You already know who you are. You already know what you stand for. You already know what matters. And because of that, your decisions become simple. Not easy, but clear. You no longer get stuck in overthinking. You don't spend days or weeks paralyzed by fear. You trust your values. You trust your process. You trust your vision. This clarity unlocks your capacity to scale your time, your energy, your impact, because you're no longer wasting energy on distraction, self-doubt, or emotional reactivity. You're no longer leaking power every time something unexpected happens. You're grounded, you're present, you're intentional. And now you begin to realize that your mindset is no longer about you alone. You begin to feel the weight of leadership, of influence, of the responsibility that comes with power, because people are watching. Not just what you say, but how you live, how you show up when no one's watching. That influence is earned, not claimed. It is not forced. It is modeled. It is lived. And you realize that your commitment to your mindset affects more than your own life. It affects your family, your business, your community, your culture. This isn't pressure. It's purpose. It's the awareness that your mindset is contagious, that your discipline becomes the standard for someone else, that your belief becomes someone else's permission, that your resilience becomes someone else's reason to keep going. And in that purpose, there is fuel. The days you don't feel like showing up, you do it anyway. Not just for you, but for the people counting on you. The people who are impacted by your growth. The people who rise when you rise. This mindset is not soft. It's not delicate. It's forged. It's resilient. It's built under tension. It's refined under pressure. It's sharpened through repetition. And every time you live in alignment with it, it gets stronger. It becomes your anchor, your compass, your edge. So you guard it. You protect it. You invest in it. You don't leave it to chance. You keep doing the work. You stay in the process. You revisit the vision. You refine the beliefs. You update the standards. You keep stretching, expanding, evolving. Not because you're chasing perfection, but because you're honoring your potential. Because you know that every layer of growth unlocks another level of life, another level of peace, of impact, of freedom. You've done the work. You've challenged your old thoughts. You've watched the way your beliefs shape your behavior. You've felt the shift in your identity. You've pushed through resistance. You've built new patterns. And now you stand here on the other side of that transformation with clarity, with presence, and with power. Not because everything is perfect, not because every doubt has disappeared, but because you now understand where real strength comes from. It's not about eliminating fear. It's about learning how to move forward anyway. It's about realizing that the power was never in the absence of challenge, but in your capacity to respond to it. You've stopped waiting for the world to get easier. You've stopped bargaining with your own potential. You've stopped asking for permission, and you've started deciding. You've started showing up as someone who doesn't just think differently, but lives differently. And that choice, that commitment, it changes everything. Not all at once, but over time. In the small moments, the quiet decisions, the conversations you walk away from, the ones you walk into, the things you stop tolerating, the things you start expecting, the habits that used to feel forced that now feel normal, the voice inside that once whispered doubt that now affirms your truth. This is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a new one, the beginning of a new way of thinking, a new way of moving, a new way of living, one that is no longer dictated by external pressure, internal fear, but by internal strength and external purpose. From this moment forward, you are not waiting. You are creating. You are not hoping for permission. You are building certainty. You are not trying to prove your worth. You are choosing to embody it fully, daily, without compromise. And no, it won't always be easy, but now you know that ease was never the point. Growth was the point. Clarity was the point. Expansion was the point. Becoming someone you can trust, someone you can count on, someone who leads themselves first so they can lead others well. That was the point. So you keep going. You don't coast. You don't get complacent. You stay hungry, not out of lack, but out of purpose. You keep refining, not because you're not enough, but because you know there is more inside you, still waiting to be unlocked. And in that journey, you become someone that others can trust, someone that others can follow, someone who walks into a room and elevates it without saying a word, because your presence speaks, your discipline speaks, your mindset speaks. You've transformed your mind, and in doing that, you've transformed your path, your perspective, your capacity, your potential. And from here, there is no going back. Not because you can't, but because you won't. Because the version of you that lived in fear, in doubt, in hesitation, that version no longer leads. Now you lead, you decide, you create, you move, you rise, not someday, not when it's easy, now.